Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in the deeper dive for SEEK, which is the Support in Education Excellence in Kentucky. Jody Maggard of Perry County Schools is going to be our presenter today. Today, you do have the ability to unmute as well as add comments in the comment box. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to stop at any time or put the question in the box. Throughout the presentation, Jody will ask questions. I ask that you please participate. It helps the training go a lot easier and make sure that you're understanding the content that's being provided. I've also put in the chat box a poll to see if you needed ELA hours, because I forgot to put that in your registration today. And so I will pull that information for those of you that do need it. If this poll doesn't work out, we will just make sure that everyone gets it, and then you'll have our certificate for the class. Other than that, Jody, I'm going to go ahead and put it over to you.
Okay, thank you. And you can see my screen, the PowerPoint, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we're ready to go. All right, well, I won't reintroduce myself. I'll just tell you a little bit more, I guess, about who I am and why that I'm here. I've been a finance officer in Perry County now for 15, going on 16 years. And so over that time frame, I guess you attempt to learn a little bit, and so I can give you what knowledge that I have as it relates to SEEK and the ever so complicated transportation formula. And so where we are today, and coming from our last meeting last month, was we went with more of an overview of the SEEK transportation funding formula. And so today we plan on getting a little bit more in depth. I don't think I can get much more in depth than what I'm going to today, because that's probably going to go to the extent of my knowledge as far as the transportation formula as it relates to SEEK. And I don't think that's a knock as to the content that we're going to cover. I think after today, if you combine last month and this month, you'll really be able to, if you get the PowerPoints, and I can send those to you, certainly, no problem there. A lot of people have asked for those already, and I've also got the transportation calculation on a spreadsheet that I have. If you'll just send me an email, I can send you that as well, and you'll see that towards the end or the latter half of the presentation. So I think if you combine last month and this month, you'll really be able to get and grasp an understanding of where you need to be as a finance officer or transportation director. I don't really know. I took a moment just to glance at the attendees, and I think a lot of folks I recognized as finance officers. I've seen several folks that I recognized in the finance world, but on the transportation side, obviously, I'm not as familiar with those attendees, but certainly I'd love to get to know you. And so if you want to just unmute at any time throughout this, I'm more of a presenter that likes the interaction. I don't like to read to you. I know that you can do that. I don't like for people to read to me. I can do that on my own. So it's much better if we have that interaction and discussion. So if you have questions, and again, we relayed a lot of things to Che last time, and so we'll try to cover some of those. And he and I have been back and forth, and Che's a busy man these days, but I can always reach back out to him, and if we have additional questions as it relates to seeking the transportation formula. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And I can't see the chat, but I'll go ahead and like every 5 minutes or so, I'll look over at the chat because what I'm looking at now is just the PowerPoint. So, but if you have something in between those 5-minute periods, please just unmute and ask your question. Okay.
And I will also follow the chat for you as well. So yes. When you stop, I'll ask the questions for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So just again, we had some of these same slides from the last time, but as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to just go back as more of an overview and take maybe 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, and just maybe if you did not or were not able to catch the last one, I don't want to just jump right into where we left off in fear that someone may, this might be the first one that you're actually watching rather than last month and now this month. So when we're talking about SEEK, we're actually talking about a formula that, well, it can be figured out. It's not an unattainable number, and so I do all kinds of trainings for board members, for finance officers, CASA, other groups throughout the state and different organizations and different audiences. And I've taught that SEEK formula numerous times. And actually, the SEEK formula, if you know the inputs, and we'll show those here in just a little bit, if you know the input data that needs to be had, then you can get to the penny on what your SEEK funding is going to be. Obviously, it's the largest amount of state allocation money that education receives, and so districts are always eager to know and understand how the SEEK formula works. And so it is a formula that's driven to promote equality and, you know, equitableness. In other words, poor districts, rich districts, and when we say poor and rich, we're speaking in terms of their tax assessments. So if you take a metropolitan area versus a rural area, the ideal being is that the SEEK funding should drive a sort of fairness in that the districts that are not able to generate as much local revenue are not at a, I think we have somebody that may need to be muted possibly, but we have that fairness in there from the SEEK funding that says the poor districts with the low property tax assessment should not be penalized, and those students should not be at a disadvantage versus those in the state that have access to abundantly more property local tax revenue. Okay, so that in essence is what the SEEK is all about. And so if you go back to 1990 and the court case that said, you know, Kentucky's allocation of state funding to school districts was not fair. It was not appropriate as far as assuring equitability throughout the state. So that's where it came from. And the ideal is that it would reduce the funding gap between school districts with the highest property values and the districts with the least property values. Now, there's a big debate, and probably increasing more now than it ever has, about how that the SEEK formula works. OEA has sort of opined on some factors as it relates to the SEEK funding formula, and they've done that as of the last few days. And so I'll share a document with you here in a little bit that I printed off this morning, and I think in total it was like 160 pages of the Office of Educational Accountability that is basically given an assessment of SEEK and some of the ideals that are being proposed on how it can be changed to continue to promote this ideal of equity as it relates to the funding gap all across the state of Kentucky. And so as we know more about that and as those changes occur, we'll try to update that obviously as well. So KDE puts out the SEEK on 3 different occasions throughout the fiscal year, one being, you know, the forecast, and that's where we are right now in the 21-22 school year, and then the tentative, and then we also have the forecast and the final. And so the most recent one that we have on KDE's website is the 21-22 tentative allocation. So you can go take a look at that if you've not already done so. I think it's been up now about 3 weeks on KDE's website. So please take a look at that. But that's kind of the calendar. And then in December, KDE likes for finance officers, likes for us to submit through the SEEK data submission the annual trend data, which allows us to go in and make projections as it relates to property tax assessment, average daily attendance, and some other input factors for next year. Okay, so that helps them kind of get an ideal as to how much funding is going to be needed, whether there's a substantial increase in student population or a decrease, how our property tax assessment's doing. So think of it like this. There's one pile of money that says SEEK on it somewhere in Frankfurt, and it's going to get distributed out to all the school districts. And KDE obviously needs to know if they've got enough money in that pot to be able to distribute out based on what the changes are going to be for next year in comparison to this year. That's just a simple analogy. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. Is we've just got a pot that says seek, a pot of money that says seek on it, and it needs to have enough money in it to cover all of our seek formulas. So here's where we're at. We get $4,000. That's the guaranteed base per student based on average daily attendance. We get $4,000. Here's where we've been going all the way back to 1990. We have seen an increase, but the argument is, and I always like to put this on there on every SEEK formula training that I do, we are not keeping up with the times, so to speak. You can look at the linear chart there, the linear graph. If we were from where we started to where we are now, we are behind. We have been behind for probably 10 years now, as we have not seen a big jump in SEEK. We've not seen any substantial increases, probably going all the way back to somewhere around 2013 maybe. So we desperately need to be able to see that $4,000 go up. I know we hear the word hold harmless oftentimes, which means they're not going to decrease it. But in essence, that is a decrease because of the cost, and you know all too well about that. The cost of everything is going up so much every single year, and yet holding that guaranteed base the same, in total, yes, we are losing money, okay? So a couple things before we take some questions here. Now we move on into SEEK and transportation, because that's why we're here, okay? We're not going to talk about special ed funding or at-risk funding. We're not going to talk about limited English proficiency or prior year home and hospital. Those are other student inputs, okay? Today we're talking about solely about transportation and about the formula that KDE utilizes to say this is how much transportation funding that the school district individually is actually going to receive, okay? Now, I put this in big highlighted red letters. The transportation, and we have to say this right up front, the transportation formula is not a fully funded mechanism, and it's not been so since 2004. So it's been quite a while, actually, since we're coming up on 20 years now that transportation has not been fully funded, okay? And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to click this arrow here. So right now we are at 54.8% funded. That means that if you look at the formula for your particular school district as it relates to transportation, you may see a much larger amount over here on the SEEK input, okay? But when you look at the actual SEEK calculation and the money that you're receiving, there is a large reduction, actually in the tune of 45.2%. And the reason being is because there has not been enough money allocated from the legislation to fully fund transportation. And so that's why we're right now at 54.8. Some of you may know this. I don't. I thought about going back and doing it, but I just didn't take the time to look at the trend. But my assumption is that's probably the lowest that it has been since 2004. I don't know that there's been a time where we're actually getting funded lower than what we are right now for transportation. And if you do know a time, please, by all means, jump in and share the data with us. But my assumption would be is that the 54.8 is probably the lowest percentage of transportation funding that we're receiving at this particular time since 2004, when it was fully funded. And I think I was reading last night, and I wrote this number down, but I may have it on a different slide, but I think right now, in order to fully fund transportation, the legislation would have to put $177 million more dollars into the SEEK funding, the SEEK formula, in order to be able to fully, let me go back to that slide, in order to fully fund SEEK as it relates to transportation, $177 million short, okay? So I'm going to stop right there. I know that was a quick little introduction, and I don't see, yes, okay. So Dina is saying, and good morning, Dina. It's good to see you on here. So she's saying that yes, we are correct in assuming, and not assumption anymore, that is the current reduction is the biggest reduction since the reduction started after 2004. So thanks, Dana, for that input. Okay. Anybody else got anything you want to jump on here right quick? Okay. So here are the SEEK inputs. I use this on all the other trainings when we're talking about SEEK in totality and looking at the whole formula. And these are the inputs, okay? These are the 7, 8. I usually cover 7 and we leave transportation off. Today we're doing quite the opposite. We're actually leaving the other 7 off, and we're only going to focus on transportation. But here are the inputs to determine how much SEEK money that you receive. Your assessment, your property values, the transportation, obviously, prior year average adjusted daily attendance of your students, the growth of the student population, the at-risk population, which is your free, I'm getting ahead of myself, which is the students that qualify for free lunch, not free and reduced, but free lunch. And then prior year December 1 child count. That's your special education population that's moderate, severe, and high. That's the qualification, or based on their IEP, they're in one of those 3 categories, and you see the weighted funding that you receive for them. And then 2 smaller portions is prior year home and hospital and limited English proficiency. So if you see 8 throughout this presentation, it's usually because I'm adding those, I'm putting those numbers on slides to go back to this input. But today we're only talking about transportation. I'm not going to spend too much time on these slides because we did that last time, but here's the due dates of all of the forms related to transportation that is due to KDE. And so you see the certification of transportation mileage. Obviously, that's a big one. We're going to talk a little bit more about the cost here in just a little bit when we get into the formula. The growth factor adjustment, more or less students riding the bus. Anybody want to take a guess from last time? Do we have more or less students riding the bus right now than we ever have? And so I'll give you a minute to give your opinion on that. Let's do it this way. Let's say, how is it in your school district? Do you see right now in 2021-22? Now take out COVID and virtual learning and all that. But if this were assuming a normal year, are you at a time frame in your school district where you're seeing less students ride the bus, or have you had an increase in students on the bus? So I'll give you a minute because I want to see if anybody says we actually are seeing more. So yeah, a lot of less students riding the bus. Yeah. I was just going to see if there was some district that said we're actually seeing more kids jump on the bus. Hey, Greg, good to see you, buddy. No problem, man. I know now that you're the big assistant superintendent over in Knott County. You got a lot of things going on, so good to have you. Yeah, we see a lot less students riding the bus, and that's no different in Perry County. We see the same thing. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, and how that is going to impact our transportation funding, because obviously if you're taking those kids off the bus, labeling them as non-transport, then your SEEK funding is going to go down as it relates to transportation dollars. Some other things on there: the Kentucky School for Deaf and Blind, the daily form and the resident form. There's due dates on that if those are applicable situations to your district. If you have a student or students attending the deaf and blind school, transportation adjustment form at the end of the year, and then also your vocational. If you have a vocational that's off-site, you're transporting students using your buses, or you're bearing the cost of that transportation, then certainly there's a form there to fill out for you to claim that mileage while the students are on that bus attending vocational learning. Okay. Anybody got any questions about that right quick before we move on? I don't want to leave anything off here. So here is where to submit those transportation forms. Most of them, I think 5 of them are on here. So this is where we also submit a lot of other reports. So finance officers are very familiar with this, and I assume that the transportation folks are too. But you can work with your IT person to get you logged in, to get you a username and a password. So to submit those transportation forms. And again, I want to go back. There's actually 4 of them. I'm sorry. There's 4 transportation forms. There's the adjustment, end of year. There's the growth factor, the mileage, and the vocational. Okay. I want to go back and I want to say, as we go through these, and we're not going through these in detail, I'm just going to kind of scan over these. So here are the formulas that you can look at. But, and I think KDE kind of agreed also with me the last time as it relates to these transportation forms. If you're a finance officer or a transportation director and you're filling out these forms and maybe the answer is none or 0, then put 0 and submit them, okay? Because if you're not turning those forms in, it gives the appearance like that they're not submitted. So even if some of these blanks that they're asking you to fill out is 0, then they still want you to submit that form, albeit that there's nothing on it other than zeros. That's still preferred rather than not submitting at all. And I've run into this a couple times when I keep getting these emails that says, hey, this adjustment form's due, or not the mileage, because it's probably never going to be 0, but some of these forms, and the reason is I'll talk to the transportation director or bus garage supervisor, and they'll say, well, we didn't submit that because it don't apply to us. Well, even if that's the case, put the zeros in there and submit it on time. That way you don't continue to get these emails because KDE is reflecting that it's a report that's not been submitted. We'll go on through that. Now, here's where we start getting into the deep dive, okay? So, and that is actually the transportation formula itself. The transportation formula actually includes a lot of various data and calculation. None of it very difficult. And I've told people this before, you know, my sons think that I'm a math whiz. They think I ought to know calculus, geometry, algebra. They think I ought to be able to just rattle it off at night when they're doing homework, and they say, hey, Dad, how do I do this? Well, and when I say I've not done that in 30 years, they say, well, Dad, but you're finance. You should know all of these things. Well, you know, I think that's sometimes how people perceive the SEEK formula to be, is that it's a hard formula. It's a lot of equations and things like that, but it's not. It's adding, subtracting, and the occasional division, okay? And so as long as you know the numbers and can add, subtract, and divide, you can basically compute to the penny the transportation formula and in its entirety, the SEEK formula. So it's not a very complicated thing. We just have to understand the inputs that go into it. Here are some of the inputs that they're using for the transportation formula. Square miles that you serve. Those square miles are going to be, what's going to be deducted from that is if you may have a independent school district within your county, you're a county school district and you have an independent school system within your county, which we do here in Perry County. Hazard Independence, that's right in the center of our county, and so that those square miles for Hazard Independent is actually subtracted from the square miles that we serve as a Perry County school district. Students transported on a daily basis and the coding for those students, we're going to talk more about that too, that we didn't talk about last time, and the T codes and how that as a finance officer or transportation director, you can run a report in Infinite Campus or have your DPP run the report, and it will show those T codes and changes that may need to be made, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Miles driven in a year. Now this is miles driven transporting kids to and from school. This does not include athletics. This does not include field trips, non-instructional type trips that are being taken for students. This is transporting them to and from school every day. Bus replacement cost, if you're on a cycle to replace buses annually or periodically or however you've done that, and then also the depreciation factor of the fleet. These are some of the major driving points that you'll need in order to calculate the transportation formula. So I'm skipping through the transportation, the vocational. If you want to know that, it's on there. There's the KRS 150 7-30. You're getting a reimbursement, but it's a separate reimbursement for those vocational school kids. And so I'm just going to leave that there. We covered that the last time. So I want to get more into the actual funding formula that we're using for transportation. So I went back, and KDE does an excellent job of putting all this data on for actually historical data on the website. So if you've not done so and you're interested in this, you want to kind of geek out and be a nerd about how many buses that we have in Kentucky and what the total value of those buses are and how many another school district has versus how many buses do you have. What's the age of other districts' buses versus the age of my buses here in Perry County? And yes, I've done that because a lot of times, your board may say, well, I was in a neighboring district and I passed a new bus there. Why do they have a new bus and we don't? You can go and you can say, well, look at their fleet, look at our fleet, and we're actually about the same. And you can compare. So KDE has actually got an inventory of every school bus in Kentucky. Now that's a spreadsheet and a half, okay? Because right now, or as of the calculation date on this spreadsheet, which is pretty recent, I think, there was 9,528 school buses in the state of Kentucky. I don't know if you need to know that, but there it is, okay? If it's ever on a Jeopardy question, you'll know it. 9,528 buses. The total cost or acquisition cost was $721 million for those buses. Net depreciation, the current value is $178 million. Now, what stands out to me about that is that the state of Kentucky and the school bus inventory that we have is getting a little bit aged, because if you look at the acquisition cost being $721 million and the only value left on that is $178 million. So we have depreciated, I guess, over a third or 2/3 of the value of all of the buses in the state of Kentucky. The average bus model right now in every district is 2011. And believe it or not, I worked on this slide yesterday, and this very conversation come up in our board meeting last night that I didn't know was going to come up, which is usually how that happens. But the board meeting, the board members, we were talking about buses and using the ESSER money to buy buses and how we were going to do that and how many buses we were going to buy and the total cost and things like that. And they said, well, if we buy 10 buses, where will this put us? And I was able to say, because I went to this inventory of school buses and I looked and I said, with those 10 or 12 buses or whatever it might be, whatever we choose to buy, then that should put about half of our fleet above or newer than the 2011 model. So if you want a little bit of a selling point there, I did that because I had that information. I don't know if it made me look any smarter or not, but hey, I tried. And so the average model, bus model, is 2011 in the state of Kentucky. Over here to the left on this screen, you'll see the various body styles. If you're interested in that, I don't know. It looks like the winner is International. I think is ICC International, I believe. And Thomas looks like a close second. So maybe ICC is not International because I see Inter there, but I don't know. If you know that and it matters to you, there's that chart. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. If anybody has any questions or comments before we start calculating some numbers.
I don't see anything yet.
Okay, perfect. All right, so T codes. Now, all of us has probably heard about this, and so if you're anything like me, you have to have a little cheat sheet that you keep on your computer or somewhere handy. So, because when I become a finance officer, I remember having to memorize this for a test we did, I think for Gatton or something. But it was a very quick memorization because I might not get that right on the exam. I know NT and I know T5, okay? Those are ones that are pretty self-explanatory from the standpoint of NT being non-transported, and T5, I'm familiar with that because why? Well, that's the money one. Okay, you get more money for the students that require special transportation, has to be in their IEP. You cannot get funding for students that you may deem to need special education, but it's not, or special transportation, and it's not listed specifically in their IEP. Okay, so you got to have those meetings, ARC meetings, and that's got to be a decision of the ARC. They develop that IEP, they put that requirement in there, or that need for special transportation, and therefore those students are listed as T5. And so we're going to talk here in a little bit about how much more money that you receive for those T5 students. So let's talk about these individually. T1 is that you ride a bus over 1 mile twice daily. T2 is that you ride the bus 1 mile twice daily, or under 1 mile, less than 1 mile. And then T3 is you ride the bus 1 mile once daily. T4 is that you ride the bus under 1 mile once daily. Now, I know that's kind of it sounds like a jumbled up mess there, but it actually does make sense. And so keep this little chart handy, because you may need it, obviously, in understanding what these means. You're getting funding for students that live a 1 mile radius outside of the school, not the school district, but the school itself. Okay, so riders versus walkers, right? Kids that are walking home. If you're living in a more metropolitan area where this might be an option. We used to have one school that had a lot of walkers because it lived right in a residential area. Obviously, you're not getting transportation funding for them. They're non-transported. Students also that are living right beside the school, but they hop on the bus and they just basically don't even give it gas and they get right off the bus. You're seeing here where the funding is actually going to promote those that, or be emphasizing those that live 1 mile away, and that is based on a radius. Okay, that is not based on a map or walking it off, or this is a radius around the school 1 mile, greater than 1 mile. Okay, that's where that's coming from. And so if you're looking at less than 1 mile, that's going to be T2 and T4. Greater than 1 mile is going to be T1 and T3. All right. Any questions about the T codes?
I do have a question.
Okay.
If everyone can put in the chat box how often you check your T codes. Do you just do it at the beginning of the year, or do you check with your students or your bus drivers a couple of times a year to ensure that the T codes are accurate within IC? And that you can just put the number in the chat box. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to kind of wait on that myself, because the next one is how that we do check that in Infinite Campus. So I was going to see, actually, that's a great question. And so I'm going to wait just a second too, to see what everyone's response is on that. I see some start of the year, twice, fall and winter, and then spring, twice per year. Looks like a DPP guideline there. 2 times a year, another twice per year. So just a little bit, I guess, of a best practice here. I would say that we could definitely say a best practice is going to be doing that sometime at the beginning of the school year, maybe once the dust clears. You get 2-3 weeks or a month into the school year, and then you have the DPP, or if you have access to Infinite Campus, you go in and run this report, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. And then maybe after the Christmas break, as you get more towards into the spring semester, around the time that that DPPs are going to be working to finalize towards the end of the school year, their SARS report, then you can maybe also check it too, because here's what can happen. You can have overlaps in Infinite Campus, and overlap, and I actually don't think that I know this, because I know this because I asked my DPP. So an overlap student in transportation in Infinite Campus may mean something like a kid went to one school at the beginning of the year, transferred to another school within the same school system, and the dates are not aligning, so that date was never closed for the school they left. So you've got an overlap. So you're reflecting that a kid is being, it almost appears, I guess, as if the kid would be transporting from two different schools, and we know that's not possible. So there are things that you need to clean up as far as that data goes in Infinite Campus. And I talked to our Infinite Campus guru yesterday, and in the DPP's office, and she was saying that, you know, for her, Infinite Campus is more a continual cleanup, making sure that the data is accurate, and certainly the T codes are no exemption from that. So I would think, at least, you know, for the transportation folks and for the finance officers, you know, let's get involved in that at least a couple times a year, fall and spring semester. And then, you know, if you see that things need to be changed or things need to be altered, then you can go in and fix that, rather than coming back and waiting until, you know, maybe it's too late and you realize on your seat funding that something's not right. And so you don't want to deal with that. So check those T codes in advance, okay? So for the next two slides, I'm getting really kind of deep over my boots here, because this is not my thing. All right, I'm the finance officer. That's, you know, I'd be a lot more familiar if we were in the Munis system, because that's what we utilize every day. But now this is Infinite Campus. I do have Infinite Campus rights in our district, as the finance officer, to be able to go in and do stuff just like this, to be able to run reports. And they don't give me much access, and I don't want it, because I really don't know too much about Infinite Campus. Some of you are probably much better users at this than I am. But I did want to screenshot a couple things from my login, because I have very limited roles and more of a viewing role than anything in our district. And so if you're in Infinite Campus, you're going to see over here in your index this filter designer under an ad hoc report. So the state has already gotten several ad hoc reports that you can just click on and run and process. And you can see here, the first one is that overlapping T code, to see if you've got any kids that are showing two different codes or two different schools. Something is not right there. So you run this on all schools, and it will show if you've got some students that need to be corrected. Probably the most important would be on this next slide, is the ad hoc report that instantly allows you to see every student and their T code throughout the district. Okay, so you just simply log into Infinite Campus. If you have Infinite Campus rights, go to the ad hoc report, go to filter designer. The state has already put in there an ad hoc report for missing T codes, and so you'll be able to go right down through there and see a list of all the kids that do not have a T code. Okay, and so if they're missing a T code, obviously you need to address that, because there needs to be something. Even if it's a non-transport, it needs to be something. If they're living less than 1 mile from the school, there needs to be a T2 or T4, needs to be a T1 or T3 if they're more than one, or a T5 if their IEP requires special transportation. Okay, so that's that report. Now, that's my extent of the knowledge there, and I can't show you what that report looks like, because obviously it has personal information, confidential information as it relates to the students. But you can go in and run this for your specific district. You can also, and I tried this yesterday and it worked seamlessly, had no problem with it. You can, just like in Munis, you can send that over to an Excel, convert that over to an Excel file, sort, however you want it to, and it works out really, really good. Okay. The only thing that, and I kind of misspoke a little bit when I was talking about these missing T codes, because I said to print out a report that shows every T code. That's more of a ad hoc report that needs to be created in your individual school system. Okay, so there's not a generic ad hoc report that I know of that you can just click on that shows like a simple, here's the student's name, John Doe, bus number, and the T code. I don't think there's a state ad hoc report for that. If there is, please let me know. I asked my DPP about that, and they said that that's more of a detailed in-district thing to where you have to go in and create that filter, okay? But it was still pretty easy because I watched them do it. But I didn't think the purpose of this training was for me to teach you how to do Infinite Campus. And if it was, I wouldn't have been the trainer, okay? So, but I will stop there in case anybody does have any comments. Okay, so we move on to depreciation. So depreciation is just like, it's so fitting for transportation, the seat transportation formula, to even make depreciation more complicated than what it should be, okay? So anyone that's an accountant, CPA, had any type of classes related to accounting, whether it be in high school or college, one of the first things that you learn is that depreciation is a means by which you lower the value or you assess the value that is being used up, okay? And so depreciation at the end of the term, whether it's a 5-year asset, a 10-year asset, a 20, 50-year asset, you say, okay, over the next 5 years, this asset is going to depreciate. At the end of that 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be, you have depreciated that asset so that the value is now basically zero on the book. Well, transportation is different, okay? So in the wisdom of some person, there used to be gas-powered buses in the state of Kentucky. And so in order to incentivize, and we've seen a lot of that lately, right? We've seen a lot of incentives, go get the shot, you know, and now we're going to incentivize people to do that by giving everyone $100, okay? Well, in order for the state and the powers that be to years ago to get rid of all the gas-powered buses and move to transition to diesel, they capped the depreciation at 10 years for a gas-powered bus, but for a diesel-powered bus, they said, we'll let you depreciate for 14 years. So the incentive is that you're going to get 4 more years of depreciation on a diesel-powered motor or engine versus a gas-powered one. So now in the state of Kentucky, there is not one single gas-powered bus, apparently. But yet we never changed the incentive. We still get 14 years of depreciation out of a bus. Well, if you look at the percentages after the 14 years, so I've given you some examples here, just a quick Excel spreadsheet. You're going to depreciate for 14 years, and here's the amounts that you're going to depreciate. Years 1 and 2 is 12%. Years 3 through 8 is 10%. Years 9 through 10 is 8. And finally, years 11 through 14, you take 6% of the state bid price. Well, if you look at that, you're actually going to depreciate 124% of the asset, which goes against everything you might have ever learned. But hey, this is transportation. There's a reason that it's complicated. And this is one of the maybe easier ones to figure out. So you're depreciating over a 14-year period instead of a 10-year period. You're actually depreciating 124% instead of 100%. Don't ask me to explain that. Just know that, well, that's how it is. Okay. So let me stop right there. And see if anyone has any questions. All right, these are things we did not cover the last time, so I want to make sure we give everyone the opportunity to discuss these.
I don't see anything right now.
Well, that probably either means that everyone's asleep, or they've went into a coma, or that I'm just doing such a fabulous job and it's so clear that no one has any questions. And I'm going to guess that A and B is probably more appropriate than C option, okay? But anyway, if you have questions, just jump in, okay? So again, we want to go to this slide here as we get into this discussion for the next 20 or 30 minutes about rewarding efficiency, okay? If you remember, we're talking about square mile served, students transported, miles driven in a year, bus replacement cost, depreciation. But if you learn anything today, know this, that the transportation formula rewards efficiency. You're trying to get to an efficient ratio so that the money you spend on transportation, you get the most back that you possibly can. And I'll show you how that works, okay? So please don't get lost here, okay? And so I'm gonna pull up this, there we go. All right. So
thank you. I was going to ask if you could do that. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was a little bit off there. But anyway, so I want to be able to show you, and I think I can do this, I believe. I think I can draw. Hold on just a second, or at least there's the laser point. Oh, okay. Can you see the laser pointer?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. And so here is the transportation calculation. I have this on a spreadsheet. I went to KDE's website and I inputted the information, obviously, that I didn't know. And we'll talk more about that here in just a little bit. But I went line by line on their spreadsheet, and you can do that too. You can go right now and go several years back and see every Excel spreadsheet that they've used to calculate your transportation in your respective district. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It goes over about, I don't know, 25 columns or so, and it has every individual school district. So I pulled my district information out. I put it in a more simple spreadsheet so that I can just look at it and, okay, it matches KDE's website, which for some reason mine was $330 off. I don't really understand why. All my numbers match, but I just couldn't get to the total. But in essence, it's all of these numbers are correct because I also done Pendleton County. They were right above me. My good friend Jan Johnston from up north in Pendleton County, and there's a reason I'm using her to compare Perry County versus Pendleton County. Okay, she's a little bit better than I am. I'm a little bit bitter about it. But I'm going to show you how I know that her transportation is operating more efficiently than mine, and how that her funding is in a better situation than my funding is as it relates to transportation. So in the green, these are things that are probably going to stay pretty consistent over the years for you, and that's total miles driven in your district, square miles, or total miles served, square miles in the district not primarily served, and then you get to net square miles. Okay, that's probably not going to change unless maybe you acquire a school district through some kind of merger or something like that. Okay, but if that happens, obviously that may change, but for the most part our boundaries have been set for many years, and that's going to stay pretty consistent. Okay, so you plug those numbers in. If you don't know what those numbers are, you can go to KDE's website, pull it from the formula. It's got everyone's in there. So again, now the most complicated thing we've done so far is take total square miles and subtract the miles in your district, if you have any, that you don't serve. Okay, a simple subtraction. Then we say, what is the gross ADA transported by district buses? Again, that is being pulled from the SARS report at the end of the year. The DPP is submitting that report, the T codes, so KDE knows, based on the T codes, based on your student population, how many days they attended school. You're not getting funding for enrollment. You're getting funded for how many days those kids rode the bus, okay? So there's your gross ADA. Here's the handicap factor, okay? Students that have an IEP that say they have to have special transportation, you get 4 times the funding, okay? So you take your T5 average daily attendance, times that by 4, and there's where you're getting that exponential funding for the specialized transportation of special ed students. That's in their IEP, okay? You times it by 4. Then the gross ADA, again, now all we're doing is adding. You're adding the handicap factor plus, and then getting to right here at 2,041, this is my district, 2,042. You're taking the gross ADA transported, adding on the handicap factor, simple addition. Moving on down. Now we look at the non-SEEK ADA transported. If you have this situation to where you're transporting non-SEEK students, all right, that has to be a deduction. And so you can see the deductions for both Pendleton County and Prairie County here. And so again, just subtract it. Subtract it from your gross ADA plus the handicap factor. Subtract non-SEEK ADA. And then that's going to give you your net average daily attendance of students transported with the handicap factor, and the net average daily attendance transported minus the handicap factor. Okay, and both of those come into play. Now, here's where everybody gets a little bit bent out of shape, including me, because you can't figure some of these things out when it comes to this per pupil density per square. You can figure it out, but once we come down here and we get to this graph, adjust, calculate per pupil, starts blowing our mind a little bit, okay? So how do you figure out the gross transported per pupil density or pupil density per square? Simple. You just take, all right, and you can see here, 4 divided by 3, which is your gross ADA, divide that by the net square miles served in your district. That's going to give you your pupil density per square. Your net, all right, just follow right along. So you come down 9 rows, okay? So you're taking this net ADA transported minus the handicap, dividing that by, again, the square mile served, and that's giving you 2 ratios. That's giving you your density per square. Now, again, we've done nothing but add, subtract, and divide, okay? So all you gotta do is just go in there, use a calculator, or like me, cheat and use Excel. The gross amount spent, all right, so this is coming from your AFR, Munis data showing what you have coded, and one of the finance officers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's function 2700, I believe. I took that off the cuff and I hope I'm right. So you're showing all the expenses for transportation. For here, mine is 2.2 million. See that? If you received any reimbursement from a federal, state, or local sources, which we did not, neither did Pendleton, the amount spent on bus replacement, okay? If you bought buses, we bought 2 small buses, I think, last year, and so there's the cost of those. Looks like Pendleton County might have bought 1, 2, maybe 3 buses, depending on the size. And here is our depreciation expense, okay? Their total seat cost, you're going to take your function 2700s, you're going to add, or you're going to subtract any refund that you might have received from a state, federal source or local source. You're going to subtract the bus replacement cost, and you're going to add back in the depreciation. And that's going to give you your total seat cost. So mine is $2.4 million. Now, I take that, I divide it by my number of students, and I get the calculated cost per pupil. Mine is $1,181. Notice over here that Pendleton County is a little bit less per pupil, okay? $925 for them. Their calculated cost is $925. Mine is almost $1,200. We transported our students 170 days. That's what we do in our district. Pendleton County was 172 days per year. And so if you divide that calculated cost per pupil by the number of days that you serve students, then that's going to give you your calculated cost per pupil day. That's a very important number, okay? That's why I've highlighted it in bright yellow. The next most important number on this is the graph adjusted cost per pupil day. Now, this is an inputted number from KDE, and there is a lot of research to be done on this. I'm not going to take the time. They're using a graph, okay, and it's called a smooth graph density group. And they're basically looking at my district and other districts that are similar to me as it relates to density, all right, square mile served, all those things. And they're inputting this number. And the reason that I chose Pendleton County is because they are in basically the same ratio that I am. I'm at 6.18, they're at 6.17. Again, this is a state inputted number. Why is that number important? Because that number is what I'm getting my funding from, not my calculated cost per pupil, but rather this graphical representation that reflects that I'm 6.18. All right. So why does that matter? Because if you want to see how much money you're going to get, right here at the bottom, I'm getting $2,026,733 in transportation funding. This is assuming we get 100% funding. But the reason I'm getting that is because they're using this 6.18, not the 6.95, okay? So efficiency comes when you can, I'm going to say, be like Pendleton County. And Jan would probably kill me if she knew I was using Pendleton County as an example. But Perry County is an example of what not to do. Pendleton County is an example of what to be, okay? Why? Does anybody want to take a guess why before I just sit here and ramble on? If you're looking at this, why would you want to be Pendleton County rather than Perry County? Oh, there's probably a lot of reasons, and you could probably say they've got a better finance officer. But looking at this chart, why would you say Pendleton County is more efficient than Perry County? Anybody want to talk?
You can unmute if you'd like to answer that question. Okay, Amy Brown says the cost per day is less than graph.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Amy Brown. You are the MVP today. And so if I had a piece of candy, I would throw it at you in class, but I can't do that virtually, so I'm sorry. But when I see you at Casbo, if you'll come up to me, I'll see if I can go to a vendor, steal a piece of candy, and give it to you, all right? So, yes, the reason that efficiency is being shown in Pendleton County is because the calculated cost per pupil day that they have calculated within their district based on their cost is less than the state adjusted cost per pupil day. And obviously that's where you want to be, okay? Because your funding is going to be based on that adjusted cost per day that the state inputs, not based on your actual cost per pupil day. So to get at or below that is going to then award you for efficiency. And I hope that's understandable. I didn't think I'd done a really good job last time of explaining that, how that we award efficiency in the state of Kentucky in transportation. And so maybe we can move on here to this one and see if this helps, okay? So this morning before we jumped on, I went and I added this particular slide, which shows Perry County. Here I am highlighting myself. I didn't pick on anybody else. But how does bus purchasing change the formula? And I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to get to the point of wanting to be Pendleton County here, how do I become more efficient? Well, let's look if I purchase buses. And let's take the conversation that my board had last night. And I said, okay, I'm going to buy $1 million of buses. I'm going to buy 10 buses. And so on the left is what you just seen. On the right is the assumption, the hypothetical situation that if Perry County buys $1 million in buses this year. Now, if we do that, we're going to be able to see our funding change for transportation. Because as you can see, and I'm sorry, I've got to change, I think I've got to change got to go back and get my laser point every time. Now I have changed my bus replacement here to $1 million rather than just the measly 116,000 last year. Now I'm going to change it to $1 million. I'm going to take my depreciation that was 245,000 last year. I'm going to add 120,000 to that because remember, we get 12% of the total purchase or bid price, 12% the first year. So I added 120,000 to my depreciation. If I do that now, look at what a substantial difference I've made in the change. So when you hear a transportation director say, hey, finance guy, we need to buy buses, that's going to up our depreciation. We're going to get money back. We're going to be more efficient. Okay, there's truth to that. Because now you can see that efficiency is coming into play. My calculated cost per pupil day, my actual calculated cost per pupil day is 4.75. It was 6.95. And so now I'm way under the actual adjusted cost per pupil day that KDE puts on there. Okay. And so again, my funding is going to be based on this. So the more efficient I can be here, the better off I am. Okay. I want to wait there, and I know that's a lot to take in. And so we've saved some time here at the end for us to kind of understand, for us to help everyone understand what we're talking about. That you're not actually getting transportation funding based on what you calculate within your district. You're getting funded based on that graph that KDE is devising that groups, and I want to say that it's 9 different groups, I believe.
Correct.
Okay, it's 9 groups that all 100, and where are we at now? 172 districts?
171, I believe.
171 districts, okay, are grouped into one of 9 categories. And that's where so we're putting like districts together in one of 9 categories. You're spitting out that graphical adjusted cost per pupil day based on that graph. That's where that number is being inputted from, and that's where your funding is coming from. Now, you adjust your up and down on spending and depreciation and bus purchases, and what you do with that, along with your students that you're transporting, is going to drive the efficiency in your district. Okay, obviously, as your student population goes up on the buses, that's going to increase the overall funding that you receive. But the other things that you can do to adjust the efficiency: bus purchasing, depreciation, lowering expenses to transport students, those are all things that's going to drive your efficiency so that you're not over what you're getting funded for. Okay.
So we have 4 questions.
I knew they would come. Okay.
The first question is, can you give an example of when you'll transport non-SEEK students?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I read some actually about that last night. And so there are times, and actually there are a lot of districts, and I was looking at that, a lot of districts that are transporting students in private school settings. I think that would probably be one, maybe the more popular of that would be non-SEEK, because they're not your students. So anytime you're transporting students that are not students of your school district, that would come into play in these non-SEEK ADA transported.
Correct. And with that being said, would those amounts that are being reimbursed from those districts go under the amount reimbursed by federal, state, or local sources? Is that where that funding would go?
I don't think so, because I think the problem would be there that you would be deducting that twice.
Okay.
I don't think that's the case. I think the reason that you are deducting them up here is because you are getting some type of other reimbursement. I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Now, the reason that you may put that in amount reimbursed by state is if KDE is reimbursing you that amount, then they may make you put that in there. I've never run into that, so I don't know the answer to that. If someone else has, by all means, jump in there and give us the answer to that. But as you can see, I reflect 0 amount reimbursed by federal and state and local sources.
Okay. The second question is the amount spent on the bus equal to actual cash or equal to the value of the buses? SEEK is based on the base cost of the bus, not the extra items.
The actual base bid price.
Okay. The third question is, you spent more money on buses, but I don't see that your reimbursement increased. Isn't that the goal?
No. Okay. So the reimbursement is not going to change. It doesn't matter if I purchase $10 million. I replace my entire fleet, and I put $10 million on there. The only thing that's going to change is this number right here, my cost calculation per pupil day. This amount in red is based on what I'm getting funded on, is a state inputted number. So it does not matter what I change these numbers to, red will not change. Okay. And so if you take this 6.17, you times it by 172, that's the days served, times it by the students that you served, that is where you're going to get into your total funding. So what you're trying to do is, you know, that you're going to get a certain amount, okay? So, but your seat costs are going to be lowered because you're taking that depreciation expense. If you buy all these new buses, your depreciation is going to escalate really quick. So basically you're showing, okay, I've got these many expenses, including depreciation, and then you're getting to a lower calculated cost. Basically, your ratio is lower than what the state's giving you funding for. I said all that to say this. Basically, you're trying to get to a ratio that's lower than what the state is actually giving you funding for. And then, well, let's stop and see if that answered the question. I hope it did, because I know that's very hard to explain, but you're actually not going to see, and I've even argued this before. A lot of times people have this idea, well, we go out and buy all these buses, we're going to get all of our money back. Well, somebody's going to have to prove that to me, especially considering that we're getting 54% of our money anyway. So you're trying to get your efficiency lower than what you're actually getting funding for, is the overall statement that we need to make.
Thank you. Would you mind sharing your Excel spreadsheet? So when you send the PowerPoint, can you share that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I don't know necessarily what's the best way of doing that. If you want me to send it to you, and because you may have the emails of everyone that's on the list.
I do. So if you send it to me, when I send out the link for the video, I will share the documents as well. So everything goes at all together.
Yes. Okay.
Are preschool students considered non-SEEK transported?
I don't think that is they're just not included.
Okay. So
preschool
because they're not,
preschool students are not included in that gross ADA number.
Okay.
Because you're getting, that's a set aside, and I actually read on that last night.
Okay. All right. And then, so in the year that you purchase a bus, you subtract that amount you spent, but you get to add it back in the first year depreciation on that bus, ? Most purchases come in the spring. So I wasn't sure if you had to wait a full year from the depreciation date to get the full depreciation.
Let me think about that. Okay. So you buy a bus in March, you're going to depreciate.
Depreciation, it rolls over in December. So I guess it would depend on when you actually have your buses in your inventory. So
yeah, so if you're buying buses now, you're going to depreciate them on that first year, which would be 22, 23.
Yep. Because what's going on now, just so you guys know, is we're actually getting the inventory updated now. So we will get all of that updated, and then anything that's actually listed in the system come December, well, between October and December, that will get the depreciation, and then we don't add anything back until next October. So KDE isn't even aware of any other buses that you have after December. So your depreciation wouldn't necessarily, if you have something come in the spring, you won't add that to your inventory on our documentation until October, and then that would roll over for depreciation the following year. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does the graph adjusted cost per pupil reflect the 54% funding reduction?
I'm trying to find a correlation there. I don't think there's a correlation between that. I think that graph, from what I understand, the information that's being inputted into that is calculating your number of students that you're serving, the total square miles that you serve. I don't see how that the 54% could have an impact on that. Unless there's something I'm not thinking of there.
So Stephanie says, I can see that you don't want to be inefficient, but it sounds like there are diminishing returns to being super efficient unless over the years it ends up bringing more reimbursement.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I don't know who made that comment, but I think I would, for what little I know, and I'm not the expert here, I've got as much to learn as anybody on this call, and I've done so in preparing for this. I don't even know how I got selected to do this, to be honest with you, other than somebody, I must have been the last person available. But the reason that I say that is because if I plug in, and I can send you guys these spreadsheets, and you can go in there and you can plug in different things. What if I lower my cost, and what if I, reduce routes? What if we have one less mechanic? What if we buy less supplies? What if we do buy more buses and when our depreciation cost goes up? And you make all of these big changes. I'm going to say that I probably agree with you that it seems like maybe the punishment of being inefficient is more severe than the reward for being efficient. It does kind of give that. It does kind of give that feel when you look at the spreadsheet and you think, man, if I go out, I've got to buy $1 million worth of buses just to get efficient. And you really don't even see a change in the formula or the funding. You're just trying to make yourself feel better about it because your total seat cost, as you see here, my total seat cost is 1.6 if I buy $1 million worth of buses, and I'm getting two million in funding. Well, that makes me feel good, but you also have to go out and buy $1 million in buses. So yes. I think I'm going to have to think on that maybe a little bit more, but for Stephanie, I think at this point I would vote with you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? And don't forget, you can unmute if you have questions. You don't have to type it in. Okay, so far we have nothing.
Okay. No, that's perfect. That's a lot of questions actually, and that's some of the questions that I thought we would get. So, and my next slide actually is just questions. So, once we, if you want to talk about depreciation or infinite campus or, the T codes or any of that stuff or the actual formula itself, I'm going to assume that most people, if you're anything like me, you're probably thinking in your mind, just send me the spreadsheet, the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go in there and plug my own numbers in and see what it looks like. And I think that's probably where everybody is at. I know I would be if I was sitting here listening to me. I would just say, send me the stuff and let me figure it out. But let me say this, that, when you're doing this and you get in there and you're looking at your numbers, if you see anything, again, I'm one of you. I'm nobody as far as that goes, but if you see something that could have been added or something that maybe could have been altered or maybe even something that was incorrect, I hope not, but please let me know. I'll be at CASBO. That's upcoming here in the next few weeks, and so if you're planning on attending CASBO, we can sit and discuss it some more, or you can give me a call here at the office, and so or send me an email and let's talk more about it, because I think it's something that for years, and again, I'm almost 16 years in the district, and I remember, when folks, and some of them are even on here, Nick Clark and I, some of us that got started about that same time, transportation was something they would teach you about SEEK, but then nobody would talk about transportation. Everybody would just say, well, that's something that, it's a convoluted deal to where you can't figure it out. Don't try to. It just is what it is. And I've heard that for years. But actually, when KDE reached out to me and said, hey, will you do a training on just the transportation part of SEEK, I thought, whoa, because I've always heard just let it go, let it be what it is. But when you start getting in there and you start looking at it, and I'm still right in the middle of it. I'm not an expert by any means, but I mean, I think it's worth getting in there and taking a look at and see how that it all works and what the state is using to put it all together. So with that being said, there is another document that's out there that, again, it's really lengthy. I mean, where the state had OEA come in and do an assessment of SEEK, and transportation was a big part of that. And it talked about how transportation is calculated, and I used a lot of that and that was just, and I think that might have been this week that they released some of that report. It's really, really good as far as how that, it all come about and transportation's calculated and all that good stuff. So I can send that as well, but I don't know if anybody really, I mean, if you want to go to sleep real good at night, maybe that'd be good reading material. But, and actually when I reached out to Che yesterday, he left me a voicemail. We were kind of playing some phone tag, and he called me back and he said, and he didn't say hello or anything. It just, when I pushed play, it said, what kind of sadist would want to talk about transportation? And so I get it, man. I get it. But if you have any questions, please let me know. If I don't know the answer, I'll reach out to Che or others at KDE that may know it, and we'll get you an answer. Okay. But I'm gonna get off of this screen so that I can see what the questions may be.
Okay, and I actually have one more item for everyone, especially as finance officers. There are currently 3 opportunities for bus rebates through DERA. Well, one of them is through DERA. One of them is through the American Rescue Plan. So if you're thinking about getting an electric school bus, there's some funding available out there. And also Kentucky has the 2021 Clean Diesel Grant Program. 2 of these are due by November 4th, and one of these is due by November 11th. It is going to be extremely important, especially if you've just done the VW funding. Do not use the same bus for the different grants. Do not use a surplus bus that you're no longer using for any of these grants, because that's basically falsifying documentation for the feds and through our state. And so so there are 3 opportunities. I will share this today with everyone that registered, because you're either a finance officer, superintendent, or a director that has registered today. So I will make sure that you get that information, but be very mindful of the dates. And if you're going to do 1 or 2 or 3 of these, make sure you know which bus you're using for which grant and the amount, because some of them are only 25%, one of them might be 50%. So you need to know what you're getting into. So read each one carefully and make your determination from there. That's all I had.
Okay. I'll just hang around here for another couple minutes just to make sure that no one has any more questions. But if not, it's good to be with everyone. Let me put a plug in if I can for CASBO here in the next few weeks. Get registered if you're not already registered. We have very similar trainings like this on a 3-day period. So get registered. I'll see everybody there. But if not, have a great day, and I'll talk to you then.
All right. Thank you. You were great.